I sat by the window, staring out at the garden that Jackson and I had once tended together. The roses were in full bloom, a burst of color against the dull green of the hedges, but today their beauty brought me no comfort. I couldn't help but think of how things used to be, before everything fell apart. How did we get here? How did the love between a mother and son turn into this chasm of silence and misunderstanding? The first sign of trouble had been subtle, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was after Jackson brought Lisa home to meet me for the first time. She was polite, even charming, but there was something in the way she looked around the house, a flicker of judgment that made my stomach twist. I dismissed it then, telling myself it was just nerves, that she was trying to make a good impression. But as the months went by, that unease grew. I began to notice the little things, how Lisa would rearrange the kitchen cabinets after I had organized them, how she would make suggestions about how I should decorate the living room. At first, I tried to brush it off. She was young, she had different tastes. But it became clear that these were not just harmless suggestions, they were attempts to change everything I had built. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the tension between us boiled over. I had made Jackson's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, hoping to bring back some of the warmth that had been missing. But as soon as Lisa saw the table, she frowned. "Margaret," she began, trying to sound casual, "I've been reading about healthier eating habits. Maybe we should try something lighter, more modern." I stiffened, my fork hovering in midair. Jackson has always loved this meal. It's a family tradition. Lisa exchanged a glance with Jackson, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "I know, but traditions can evolve. Maybe it's time we tried something new." I set my fork down, unable to hide the hurt in my voice. "What's wrong with the way we've always done things?" Jackson finally spoke, his voice soft but strained. "Mom, Lisa's just trying to help. We've been talking about eating healthier, and she's right. It might be good for us." I felt the walls closing in, the air thick with the unspoken truth. This wasn't just about dinner. It was about control, about the slow erosion of everything I held dear. "Is that what you want, Jackson? To change everything?" He hesitated, his eyes darting between Lisa and me. "I just want us all to be happy." But I knew better. The balance of power in our family was shifting, and I was being pushed out. That dinner was the beginning of the end. After that, the arguments became more frequent, more pointed. Lisa and I clashed over everything, the way I kept the house, the way I interacted with Jackson, even the way I spent my time. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the living room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the hallway. "She's too controlling, Jackson," Lisa was saying. "We can't keep living like this, with her always hovering over us." "She's my mother, Lisa," Jackson replied, his voice tired. "I can't just abandon her." "I'm not asking you to abandon her," she said, her tone softening. "But we need space. We need to start our own life together, without her always in the background." I pressed a hand to my chest, the pain of her words cutting deep. I retreated to my bedroom, tears staining my eyes. They were planning to leave, to move out and leave me behind. And the worst part was, I couldn't blame them. I had been holding on too tightly, too afraid to let go. The day they moved out was a blur of emotions. Jackson tried to reassure me, to tell me it was for the best, but all I could see was the finality of it. They packed their things quickly, Lisa directing the movers while Jackson avoided my gaze. As they loaded the last box into the car, Jackson finally turned to me. "Mom, we'll visit often. This doesn't mean we're abandoning you." I forced a smile, though my heart felt like it was breaking. "I know, Jackson, you have to do what's right for you." He hugged me then, a brief, awkward embrace that did nothing to ease the ache inside me. Lisa stood by the car, watching us with an unreadable expression. When Jackson let go, he joined her, and together they drove away, leaving me standing alone on the porch. I watched them until the car disappeared around the corner, the silence of the house pressing in on me like a weight. I turned back to the empty rooms, the memories of our life together echoing in the stillness. This house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a hollow shell, a reminder of all I had lost. In the days that followed, I tried to keep busy, to find solace in the routines that had once brought me comfort. But the loneliness was overwhelming. I missed Jackson's presence, his voice, the way we used to talk about everything and nothing. I even missed the arguments with Lisa, as painful as they were, because at least they meant I wasn't alone. But now all I had were memories of a fractured family, of a love that had been worn down by time and circumstance. And as I sat by the window, staring out at the garden that Jackson and I had once tended together, I wondered if we would ever find our way back to each other. The days after Jackson and Lisa moved out were the hardest. The house, once alive with the sounds of family, felt cold and empty. The ticking of the clock in the hallway seemed louder, more oppressive, as if counting down the minutes of my loneliness. I tried to keep busy, tending to the garden, knitting, even watching old television shows that once brought me comfort, but nothing seemed to fill the void. It was during one of those restless afternoons that I found myself at a community event. The local senior center was hosting a gathering, a social hour as they called it, to bring people together. I almost didn't go. The thought of mingling with strangers seemed exhausting, but something nudged me out the door that day, as if the universe knew I needed a change. The event was held in a large, bright room filled with tables and chairs arranged in a semicircle. The walls were decorated with cheerful banners, and there was a table in the corner laden with snacks and drinks. I felt out of place at first, unsure of how to approach anyone, but then I saw him, Cooper White. He was sitting at a table by the window, a warm smile on his face as he chatted with a group of people. Something about him drew me in, and before I knew it, I was making my way over to him. As I approached, he looked up and our eyes met. There was a kindness in his gaze that put me at ease immediately. "Hello there," he said, his voice rich and welcoming. "You look like you could use some company." I smiled, feeling a bit shy. "I suppose I could. Mind if I join you?" "Not at all. Please have a seat." He gestured to the chair next to him, and I sat down, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in months. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had known each other for years. Cooper was a natural storyteller, weaving tales of his past with a wit and charm that kept me captivated. He talked about his time in the Navy, his late wife, and the many places he had traveled. I found myself laughing at his jokes, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. "So, Margaret," he said after a while, "what brings you here today?" I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. Just needed to get out of the house. It's been a bit lonely lately. He nodded, his expression softening. I know the feeling. After my wife passed, I thought I'd never feel connected to anyone again. But coming to these events has helped. It's nice to be around people who understand. There was a pause, a comfortable silence that felt like a shared understanding. "Tell me about your family," he said gently. I took a deep breath, unsure of where to start. "I have a son, Jackson. He's a good man, but, well, things have been difficult lately. He and his wife moved out recently, and it's just been hard adjusting to the quiet." Cooper nodded again, his eyes full of empathy. "Family can be complicated, but it sounds like you've done a good job raising him. Sometimes they just need to find their own way." "Maybe," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "I just miss him, that's all." "I get that," Cooper said softly. "It's hard to let go, especially when you've been so close. But sometimes letting go is the best thing you can do for both of you." We talked for hours that day about our lives, our struggles, and the small joys that kept us going. When the event ended, I felt a pang of disappointment. I hadn't realized how much I had needed that connection, that feeling of being seen and heard. As we were leaving, Cooper turned to me with a smile. "Would you like to meet up again sometime, Margaret? Maybe we could grab a coffee or go for a walk." I hesitated for a moment, surprised at how quickly we had bonded. But the thought of spending more time with Cooper, of having someone to share my days with, filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'd like that, Cooper. I'd like that very much." And so, a new chapter of my life began. Cooper and I started meeting regularly, first for coffee at a little cafe near the park, and then for walks through the gardens. He was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that life still had joys to offer, even in the later years. One afternoon, as we strolled through the park, the sun casting a warm glow on the autumn leaves, Cooper turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Margaret," he began, "I've been thinking. We both enjoyed each other's company so much, and we're both living alone. What would you think about moving in together? Not for any reason other than companionship, of course. His words took me by surprise, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. But as I looked into his kind eyes, I realized how much I had come to care for him. The idea of living together, of sharing our days and easing each other's loneliness, didn't seem strange at all. In fact, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "I think I'd like that, Cooper," I said finally, my voice soft but sure. "I think I'd like that very much." And with that, a new companionship was born. We decided to take things slow, but the decision brought a sense of peace and joy that I hadn't felt in a long time. Cooper filled the empty spaces in my life with laughter, warmth, and a shared understanding that only comes with age. We were two souls who had found each other at just the right time, and for that I was deeply grateful. As I looked ahead to our future together, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something beautiful, a new chapter in a life that I had thought was coming to an end. And for the first time in a long while, I was excited to see what the future would bring. Living with Cooper brought a new light into my life, one that I hadn't expected to find again. Our days were filled with simple pleasures, morning walks in the park, afternoons spent reading side by side, and evenings filled with laughter and conversation. It felt like I had been given a second chance at happiness, and I embraced it with open arms. But life, as it often does, took an unexpected turn. It began with small things, aches and pains that wouldn't go away, a forgetfulness that seemed to creep into my daily routine. At first, I brushed it off as part of getting older. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that something more serious was happening. I started to lose track of time, misplacing items around the house, forgetting conversations I'd had just hours before. Cooper noticed, of course, and his concern grew with each passing day. One evening, after I had forgotten to turn off the stove for the third time that week, Cooper sat me down in the living room. The soft light from the table lamp cast shadows on his face, making his expression seem even more somber. "Margaret," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I think we need to talk about what's been happening." I looked down at my hands, avoiding his gaze. "I know I've been a little forgetful lately, but it's nothing to worry about. Everyone gets like this eventually, right?" Cooper reached out and took my hand in his touch warm and reassuring. "It's more than just forgetfulness, Margaret. I'm worried about you. Maybe we should see a doctor just to be sure everything's okay." I shook my head, pulling my hand away. The thought of doctors and tests filled me with dread. "I'm fine, Cooper, really. There's no need to make a fuss." But Cooper wasn't convinced, and neither was Jackson when he came to visit the following week. I could see the worry in his eyes as I struggled to remember the details of our last conversation, as I stumbled over my words trying to assure him that everything was fine. "Mom," Jackson said, his voice filled with a mix of concern and frustration, "this isn't like you. We need to figure out what's going on." I sighed, feeling cornered. "You're both overreacting. I'm just getting older, that's all. There's no need to treat me like I'm falling apart." Jackson exchanged a glance with Cooper, who nodded slightly. "Maybe we should consider some extra help, just until we know what's going on," Jackson suggested carefully. "There's a place I've heard about, a boarding school that offers care for people in your situation. It's just temporary, until we know more." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. A boarding school. The idea of being sent away, of leaving the home I had come to love, was unbearable. "I don't need to be put in some institution," I snapped, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm not some invalid who can't take care of herself." "Mom, it's not like that," Jackson said, trying to calm me down. "This place is different. It's not a nursing home. It's more like a retreat. You'll have your own space, and they'll help you with anything you need." I looked at Cooper, searching his face for support, but his expression was unreadable. "Cooper, please," I whispered, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. "Tell him I don't need this." Cooper hesitated, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Margaret, we all want what's best for you. Maybe just for a little while, it would be good to have some extra help. We can see how things go, and if you don't like it, we'll figure something else out." Betrayal flooded through me, sharp and bitter. They were all against me, conspiring to send me away. But I was too tired to fight, too exhausted by the constant confusion that had become my daily reality. So I agreed reluctantly, telling myself it was just temporary, that I would be back home soon. The day Jackson and Cooper took me to the boarding school was grey and overcast, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. The building itself was large and imposing, with high stone walls and small windows that gave it an almost fortress-like appearance. The sign outside read Cedarwood Care Facility, but it felt more like a prison than a place of care. Inside, the atmosphere was no better. The hallways were dimly lit, the floors covered in dull linoleum that squeaked underfoot. A stern-faced woman met us at the front desk, her expression as cold as the air around her. "Mrs. Miller, welcome to Cedarwood," she said without a hint of warmth. "We've prepared a room for you. Follow me, please." I glanced back at Jackson and Cooper, hoping for some reassurance, but Jackson's face was a mask of forced optimism, while Cooper's eyes were filled with guilt. They said their goodbyes quickly, promising to visit soon, and then I was left alone with the woman, who led me down a series of long, winding corridors. My room was small and bare, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out onto a bleak courtyard. The walls were painted a pale, institutional green, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. I sat down on the bed, feeling a deep sense of dread settle over me. Days passed in a blur of monotony. The routine was strict, meals at the same time every day, followed by mandatory recreational activities that felt more like forced labor than anything enjoyable. The other residents shuffled around like ghosts, their faces blank, their spirits broken. The staff were cold and distant, their smiles never reaching their eyes. One evening, as I sat alone in the common room, staring blankly at the television, a woman approached me. She was older, with silver hair neatly pinned back in a kind, but tired, face. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to the chair next to mine. I nodded, grateful for the company. "Please, go ahead." She settled into the chair and extended her hand. "I'm Rose Hall. I've been here a while, and you look like you could use a friend." "Margaret Miller," I replied, shaking her hand. I could definitely use a friend right now. Rose smiled, a genuine smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "This place is awful, isn't it?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my situation pressing down on me. It's not what I expected. I thought this was supposed to be a place of care, but it feels more like a prison. Rose nodded in understanding. "That's because it is a prison, Margaret. We're all trapped here, and most of us have been put here by people who claim to love us." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I've seen it too many times," Rose said, her voice low. "Families put their loved ones in places like this to get rid of them, to take control of their assets, or simply because they can't be bothered to care for them anymore. The staff here are in on it too. They keep us drugged, compliant, so no one asks too many questions." Panic surged through me as the reality of my situation began to sink in. "I can't stay here, Rose. I have to get out." Rose leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been planning an escape for months, but I can't do it alone. With your help, we might just be able to pull it off." My heart raced at the thought of escaping, of breaking free from this nightmare. "What do we need to do?" Rose's eyes gleamed with determination. "First, we need to get a message to someone on the outside. Someone we can trust. Do you have anyone like that?" "Cooper," I said immediately. "He's the only one I can trust." Rose nodded. "Good. We'll need to find a way to get a message to him, and for that, we'll need the help of one of the staff. There's a nurse here, a good one, who doesn't agree with what's happening. If we can get her on our side, we might just have a chance." The plan was risky, but it was the only hope I had. As Rose and I began to strategize, a flicker of determination ignited within me. I had to get out of this place. I had to find a way back to the life I had lost, the life that had been stolen from me. And with Rose by my side, I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. Together, we would find a way to escape this prison, to reclaim our lives and our freedom, no matter what it took. The days following my conversation with Rose felt like a blur, a haze of anxiety and determination. Every interaction, every whispered word, held the weight of our secret plan. The walls of Cedarwood Care Facility, once oppressive and suffocating, now seemed like obstacles that could be conquered. But the stakes were high, and one wrong move could trap us here forever. Rose and I spent our evenings in the common room, carefully planning our escape under the guise of idle conversation. We knew we couldn't trust anyone except the nurse Rose had mentioned, Nurse Emily. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with a soft voice and kind eyes that seemed out of place in this cold, harsh environment. Rose had observed her for months, noting how she treated the residents with genuine care, unlike the other staff who moved through the motions with chilling indifference. One evening, as we sat by the window, pretending to watch the rain streak down the glass, Rose leaned in closer to me. "Margaret, we have to talk to Nurse Emily soon. We need her to help us get a message to Cooper. He's our only hope on the outside." I nodded, my heart pounding at the thought. How do we get her alone? We can't afford to draw any suspicion. Rose smiled faintly. "Leave that to me. I've been here long enough to know the staff's routines. Emily usually does her rounds in the early morning, just before breakfast. I'll find a way to get her to your room, and when she's there, you'll have to convince her to help us." That night, sleep was elusive. My mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. What if Emily refused to help? What if she reported us to the head doctor? The fear gnawed at me, but I knew we had no other choice. This was our only chance. The next morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the small window in my room, I heard the soft click of the door opening. I turned to see Rose standing there, a serious look on her face. "She's on her way," Rose whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "This is it, Margaret. You have to make her understand." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Moments later, Nurse Emily entered the room, her expression neutral as she carried a tray of medication. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," she said softly, setting the tray on the small table beside my bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Emily," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk. But it's not safe here. Can you close the door?" She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern, but did as I asked, quietly closing the door behind her. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "Emily, I'm not just a resident here. I was brought here under false pretenses, and now I'm trapped. We're all trapped. But Rose and I, we have a plan to get out. And we need your help." Emily's eyes widened, and she glanced at the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "Mrs. Miller, you have to be careful what you say. If anyone hears this—" "Please listen," I interrupted, my voice pleading. "I know this is a lot to ask, but we have no one else to turn to. My friend Cooper, he's the only one who can help us from the outside, but I can't contact him on my own. If you could just get a message to him, tell him what's happening." Emily was silent for a moment, her face a mask of indecision. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear of losing her job, of getting caught, but also the compassion that had made her stand out to Rose in the first place. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Hope surged within me, and I quickly explained. "Cooper doesn't live far from here. If you could find a way to call him, let him know where I am, he'll come for me. For us." "And how will that work?" Emily asked, still skeptical. "Even if I call him, it's not like he can just walk in here and take you out." "Cooper is resourceful," I assured her. "He'll know what to do. All we need is for him to be aware of the situation. He'll find a way to get us out of here." Emily chewed her lip, considering the risks. "This is dangerous, Mrs. Miller. If anyone finds out what we're planning—" "I know," I said, my voice urgent. "But please, Emily, you're our only hope. Without your help, we'll be stuck here forever." There was a long silence as Emily weighed her options. Finally, she sighed and nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll find a way to contact Cooper, but you have to be careful. Don't let anyone else know what we're planning." Tears of relief filled my eyes, and I reached out to squeeze her hand. "Thank you, Emily. You don't know how much this means to us." Emily gave me a small, tense smile. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." Over the next few days, Rose and I continued with our routine as if nothing had changed, though inside, I was a bundle of nerves. Emily remained discreet, but I noticed the brief glances she'd send our way, a silent reassurance that she hadn't forgotten her promise. It wasn't until a week later that Emily came to me with news. She caught me in the hallway as I was being led to the common room, her face pale and tense. "I managed to get a message to Cooper," she whispered as she adjusted the blanket around my shoulders. "He knows where you are, and he's working on a plan. But it's going to take time. You need to be patient." My heart soared with hope, but I knew we still had a long way to go. Did he say what he's going to do? Emily shook her head. No, just that he's coming up with something. But you have to be ready for anything. When the time comes, you'll need to move fast. That evening, I shared the news with Rose as we sat together in the common room. Her eyes lit up with excitement, though she quickly tempered it with a dose of reality. This is good, Margaret, Rose said, keeping her voice low. But we need to be prepared. If Cooper's coming, we'll need to gather supplies, things we can use to help us escape. What kind of supplies? I asked, my mind racing. Anything we can get our hands on, Rose replied. Food, water, blankets, anything that will help us survive if we have to leave in a hurry. And we'll need to scout the building, find out where the exits are and when the security is lightest. We spent the following days quietly gathering what we could, stashing food from our meals and small items that might be useful. Rose was particularly clever at this, having spent months observing the staff's routines and the layout of the facility. She knew which doors were likely to be unlocked and when the guards were least attentive. One night, as we sat together in my room, Rose laid out the final details of our plan. Emily's going to give us a signal when Cooper's ready. When we get that signal, we'll need to act fast. We'll head for the east wing. The security there is lighter. And there's a side door that leads out to the back garden. From there, we can make our way to the road. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. And what about the guards? What if they catch us? Rose's eyes darkened. We'll have to be careful, but if it comes to that, we'll do whatever it takes to get out. We can't let fear stop us, Margaret. We've come too far. The thought of what lay ahead terrified me, but I knew Rose was right. This was our only chance, and we had to take it, no matter the risks. The night of our escape finally arrived. Emily had slipped us a note that afternoon, tucked discreetly into the folds of my blanket. Tonight, after lights out, be ready. My heart pounded in my chest as I showed the note to Rose. Her eyes gleamed with determination, and we silently began our preparations. We dressed in layers, pulling on our warmest clothes, and stuffed our pockets with the food and supplies we had gathered. Every rustle of fabric, every creak of the floorboards felt magnified in the quiet of the night. When the lights went out, plunging the facility into darkness, Rose and I moved like shadows, slipping out of our rooms and into the hallway. The building was eerily silent, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant drip of a leaky faucet. We crept through the corridors, our hearts pounding with every step. As we neared the east wing, Emily appeared out of the shadows, her face pale but resolute. The side door is unlocked, she whispered. The guards are on their break, but you have to move quickly. I'll cover for you as long as I can. Thank you, Emily, Rose whispered back, gripping her hand briefly. You've saved our lives. Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Good luck. Get out of here and don't look back. With that, we moved towards the east wing, our footsteps silent on the cold linoleum floor. The side door was just ahead, and beyond it, freedom. My heart raced as we reached the door, and Rose gently pushed it open. The night air was cold against my skin, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. We were outside, but our journey was far from over. We'd hurried through the garden, keeping low and out of sight, and made our way to the road beyond. As we reached the road, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. My heart leaped into my throat as the car approached, but Rose held up her hand, signaling for me to stay calm. The car slowed to a stop, and the driver's side window rolled down. Cooper's familiar face appeared, etched with concern and relief. Get in, quickly, he urged, his voice tense. We didn't hesitate. Rose and I scrambled into the car, and Cooper sped off into the night, leaving Cedarwood and its suffocating walls behind us. As we drove, the reality of what we had just done began to sink in. We were free. We had escaped. But the road ahead was uncertain, and I knew our journey was far from over. Rose reached over and squeezed my hand, her grip strong and reassuring. We did it, Margaret, she whispered. We're free. I nodded, tears streaming down my face as the weight of our escape finally lifted from my shoulders. We're free, I echoed, my voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. But even as the car sped down the dark, empty road, I knew that our fight wasn't over. We had escaped Cedarwood, but there were still others trapped inside, others who needed our help. and I was determined to make sure they would find their freedom too. For now, though, we were free, and that was enough. We had each other, and together we would face whatever came next. The dawn light filtered through the trees as Cooper's car sped along the country road. The chill of the early morning air contrasted sharply with the warmth of the relief coursing through me. We had escaped, but as the reality of our freedom began to settle in, so did the gravity of what lay ahead. We had to make things right, not just for ourselves, but for everyone still trapped in Cedarwood. Cooper drove with a focused intensity, his hands gripping the steering wheel as the miles bled past. Rose sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, the determination in her expression unwavering. We all knew that our journey wasn't truly over until the facility, and the people who ran it, were exposed for the cruel deception they had perpetuated. After a long silence, Cooper finally spoke, his voice low and resolute. "We're heading to the authorities. I've already made some calls to people who can help. We need to report everything you've seen and experienced." I nodded, the idea of finally bringing justice to Cedarwood filling me with a fierce resolve. We can't let them get away with this, Cooper. What they've done, it's unforgivable. Rose added, her voice firm. They've taken advantage of the most vulnerable people, deceiving them and their families. We have to make sure no one else suffers like we did. Cooper glanced at us through the rearview mirror, his expression softening. We will. But we need to be careful. These people are dangerous. They've gone to great lengths to keep this operation under wraps. Once we report this, things might move fast, and they'll try to cover their tracks. Then we have to be faster, I said, feeling a renewed strength within me. We've come this far. We won't back down now. We reached the small town an hour later, pulling into the parking lot of the local police station. My heart pounded as we stepped out of the car, the enormity of what we were about to do pressing down on me. But there was no turning back now. Inside the station, we were greeted by a middle-aged officer with a gruff demeanor but kind eyes. Cooper explained the situation briefly, and the officer's expression quickly shifted from skepticism to concern. "This is serious," he said, ushering us into a private room. "We'll need to take your statements and gather as much evidence as possible. If what you're saying is true, we'll need to act quickly to prevent them from covering their tracks." We spent the next several hours recounting every detail of our experiences at Cedarwood. Rose and I spoke of the deception, the manipulation, and the inhumane conditions we had witnessed. Cooper provided the names of contacts who could corroborate our story and help with the investigation. As we finished giving our statements, the officer leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "We'll launch an investigation immediately. You've done the right thing by coming forward, but you need to be prepared. Once this hits, there's going to be a lot of attention on all of you." "We're ready," Rose said, her voice steady. "We'll do whatever it takes to see this through." The officer nodded. "Good. In the meantime, I'll arrange for protective measures. It's important that you stay somewhere safe until this is resolved." As we left the police station, the weight of what we had just set in motion settled over me. The truth was finally coming to light, but with it came uncertainty and the possibility of retaliation from those who had profited from Cedarwood's dark secret. Cooper drove us to a nearby safe house, a small cottage nestled in the woods, far from prying eyes. It was a temporary refuge, a place where we could regroup and wait for the investigation to unfold. As we settled in, the tension began to ease, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. We had taken the first step toward justice, and now all we could do was wait. A few days later, the news broke. Cedarwood Care Facility was raided by the authorities, and the head doctor, along with several key staff members, were arrested on charges of fraud, abuse, and unlawful imprisonment. The media swarmed the story, exposing the facility's dark practices and the suffering of its residents. Rose and I watched the coverage from the cottage, our emotions a mix of relief and sorrow. The faces of the other residents flashed across the screen, faces of people who, like us, had been deceived and trapped. But now, thanks to our efforts, they were free. Cooper entered the room, holding a stack of newspapers. "The investigation's moving quickly," he said, setting the papers down on the table. "The authorities are working to shut down Cedarwood and ensure that everyone who was involved is brought to justice." Rose picked up one of the newspapers, scanning the headlines. "This is just the beginning. There are more places like Cedarwood out there, and we need to make sure they're exposed too. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. We can't stop now. We need to keep fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. Cooper smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. You two are incredible. I'm just glad I could help. We couldn't have done it without you, I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. But this isn't just about us anymore. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. The days that followed were filled with interviews, meetings with lawyers, and the constant buzz of media attention. Jackson, my son, arrived at the cottage shortly after the news broke, his face etched with guilt and relief. Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he embraced me. I'm so sorry. I should have known something was wrong. I should have done more. Jackson, I whispered, holding him tightly, you're here now, and that's what matters. We can move forward together. As we talked, it became clear that Jackson had been deceived by his wife, who had manipulated him into believing that sending me to Cedarwood was in my best interest. The revelation of her role in the scheme had shattered their marriage, and Jackson was in the process of filing for divorce. I'll make it right, Mom, Jackson promised. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe and that this never happens again. Over the next few weeks, the investigation into Cedarwood continued to uncover more evidence of the facility's illegal activities. The head doctor and his associates faced trial, and the media continued to expose the broader issue of elder abuse in care facilities across the country. It was a long, difficult process, but each day brought us closer to justice. As the dust began to settle, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had been through. The fear, the pain, and the uncertainty had been overwhelming, but through it all, we had found strength in each other. Rose, Cooper, and even Jackson, we had all come together in the face of adversity, and that bond had given me the courage to fight for our freedom. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the cottage, Cooper and I sat together on the porch. The air was filled with the sounds of birds chirping and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was a peaceful moment, a stark contrast to the chaos we had endured. Margaret, Cooper said, breaking the comfortable silence, what do you want to do now? We've been through so much, and I think we've earned the right to start fresh. I looked out at the setting sun, feeling a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. I want to live, Cooper. I want to enjoy the time we have left, to make the most of every moment. But more than that, I want to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. Cooper smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. Then that's what we'll do. We'll build a new life together, but we'll also keep fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew that whatever challenges we faced, we would face them together. Rose joined us on the porch, her expression serene as she gazed out at the darkening sky. It's a beautiful evening, she remarked, settling into a chair beside us. I think we're finally ready for a new beginning. We are, I agreed, taking Cooper's hand in mine. And this time, it's going to be on our terms. The three of us sat there in comfortable silence, the weight of the past lifting as we embraced the promise of the future. We had faced the darkness and come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of peace that had long eluded me. We had reclaimed our lives, and now we could finally begin to live them fully, free from fear and uncertainty. It was a new beginning, and I knew, deep in my heart, that it was the start of something beautiful.